Hello, it's Karen Burniston here with a card making with dies video. I received a lot of requests for this video, which is how to decorate our surprise ball pop-up die set like a gnome. So when I originally made a card like this, it was in a Christmas theme, but since we are past Christmas now, I thought it'd be fun to decorate it as a garden gnome. The surprise ball uses a hidden rubber band, and that's what makes it spring up when you release it. And then to trap it, I created a petal fold envelope type of card using our flap enclosure die set. Okay, I'll start first with the gnome. And for the surprise ball, I need to cut the die twice. I've chosen teal for the bottom half of the gnome and then red for the top. There are a couple different size circles in the set. I just chose one to be the hands of the gnome. And I'll need that cut 4 times, but I can cut 2 at a time. I wanted an oval for the nose. I went searching through my dies and found a good size in the Ocean Animals die set. Using the ball die itself, I want to cut just one panel out of the same color that I'm using for the hands and the nose. Now you can use any die cutting machine that can accommodate a wafer thin die, and today I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6. Now, since the ball die has score lines in it, I would not suggest that you stack up the cardstock for this one, so I'll cut it once out of teal and then once out of red. It is important with the surprise ball that you're starting with 2 pieces that you've oriented them exactly the same, meaning that if you line them up over the top of each other, everything would line up perfectly. You should be able to easily see the score lines on the piece from one side easier than the other. So I would just make that the side that you're looking at, where you can see those score lines really easily. Okay, so if you think of the surprise ball as like a hexagon that has 6 spokes, 2 of the spokes have these little reinforcing wings that fold to the back, and that's true on both pieces. So whatever you do on piece 1, you just do the identical thing on piece 2. So folding those little side reinforcing wings to the back. So now turning the pieces over so that I can see those wings that I've folded in, all of them need to be glued down. My favorite glue is LINECO neutral pH adhesive. I use our fine tip bottles for dispensing it. And a great tip from Joanne is to have a damp paper towel in the bottom of a jar. Then you just keep your glue bottles while they're open down in that damp paper towel, and it does an amazing job of keeping the glue flowing while you're working on your projects. I like to use clips to hold things down while the glue is setting up. A lot of people noticed these white ones in my last video and asked me about them. They're just bag clips. You can find them in different styles and colors from different brands. Sometimes they're magnetic, but mainly what you want to be searching for is something that says it's a bag clip. And then I just do the exact same thing for the red half of the surprise ball. So just gluing down those wings. Okay, glue is set up, so now I'm going to turn that ball half around again where I can see the outside, and I'm going to go around and start working the folds at the base of all the outside tabs. So there are full tabs on 2 of the spokes and then these half tabs on the other 4, and they all just get folded to the back. Okay, now I want to find the fold lines at the base of each spoke, and I just want to go around the ball and just push each side to the back and then back out again. And that will define that hexagon. Okay, so then once I found all of the folds, you can see that's half of the surprise ball. The teal color is actually the bottom half of the surprise ball. So I'm going to go ahead and put a brad through the hole at the base of the surprise ball and just open up the prongs underneath. Okay, the red one is going to be the exact same process, so I'm going to speed up the footage here and just show that I'm going around and working all of those same folds. The red one will be the top half of the surprise ball, so it does not need a brad. Now what we're going to do is glue these 2 halves of the ball together, starting with one of the sides that has the hole and the slit, but I have to make sure that both the hole and the slit line up. So I may need to switch to the other one to make that happen. So see, both the hole and the slit are going to line up when I add some glue and glue those 2 tabs together. I'm being pretty generous with my glue. These are the sides that are going to hold the rubber band, so I want to make sure that they're good and strong and very well glued together. Now I have both halves of the surprise ball glued together, so it is time to add the rubber band. I'm using a number 12 soft stretch rubber band. Seems to work great for most cardstocks with the surprise ball, but you could also use a number 14 or a number 16. You may have to tie a knot in them. If you watch the assembly video, you'll learn more about that. Okay, taking a quick look, I can see which side has the slit on it, and it's the other side that I want to now travel around and connect the other sides of the surprise ball. So to do that, I'm going to add my adhesive to those little half tabs. Now they are not a kiss connection. In other words, they do not connect to each other like this. They actually just sit side by side and connect to the other half of the ball. So the red tab is connecting to the teal side of the ball, and the teal tab is connecting to the red side of the ball. And they'll just sit side by side in there. Let's take a look from the inside so you can see how that looks. Okay, continuing on to the next side, and I want to do the exact same thing. So the adhesive goes on the half tabs. They just sit side by side and connect to the other half of the surprise ball. So after doing those two sides with half tabs, you'll find yourself back around to the other kiss connection, which are the full tabs. And we're going to do the exact same thing that we did on the first kiss connection, which is to completely coat one of the tabs with adhesive. This time they are connecting to each other. That is a kiss connection, and you do want the holes and the slits to line up. You can do that just by looking on the outside and making sure that everything is aligned. Okay, there's still one half of the ball that's open, so just bending those sides out of the way, it's easy to just reach in there now and grab the rubber band and stretch it to the other side. Okay, this is the time to assess whether your rubber band is too tight or too loose. It's definitely not too loose. It's bordering on being a little too tight, but it's not inverting a side at this point, so it will probably be fine once I get all of the other tabs connected. Okay, I'm going to finish out the assembly of the ball by just connecting my half tabs, just the same way that we did on the other side of the ball. Now, one thing I noticed is that my rubber band side inverted, so I want to make sure I pull that to the outside before I connect the final set of tabs. Okay, and just pinching that for a second, making sure that glue sets up nicely before I release it, and then just giving everything a good check. It is springing up quite nicely. Now, I do notice a pretty good gap here between the non-rubber band sides, and so I can adjust that actually. I can kind of just carefully push one side over the other a little bit, and you'll see it'll bring those two sides closer together. So you can make little adjustments like that in the finished surprise ball. To make my gnome's hat, I'm going to use the second largest of the crosshatch rectangles in our rectangles crosshatch die set. So that's going to give that really cool edging around the hat. Okay, but I don't want the hat to be a rectangle, so I need to find the center at the top. So I'll just do that by folding it over and just giving it a little slight pinch so that I can see where to line up the die. And then what I'm going to do is just line the die up with the corner on that little pinch mark, and then the other corner along the edge, wherever it comes to at the bottom. And this might be a good time for me to actually use some temporary removable tape so that it doesn't slide. But then I'm going to just roll that through and then repeat that process for the other side. So just a fun way to make that gnome's hat where it's going to have that cool crosshatch edging on all the sides. Okay, remember I cut that one panel of the ball die to be his face, so I'm going to glue that piece on first. And then there are decorator pieces included in the surprise ball that will cut that same little trapezoid just a little bit smaller. Now, I wasn't thinking I was going to use these at all, but remember my rubber band was a little tight, and I decided that adding the little structure of these extra reinforcing pieces would be a good idea. There's also a decorator hexagon to go on the top of the ball. It will cover up the hole. Now, I will be using our flap and closure die set later on to make the card, and I discovered that wrapping the yarn around that die makes the perfect length for all of his beard and hair pieces. So I'm just wrapping some white yarn around that die a whole bunch of times, probably at least 30, and then just sort of sliding it off the die where I can just cut through the seam, and then I'll have a whole bunch of pieces all at one time ready to go on the gnome. I also love using my bag clips to just hold the ball down closed so I can decorate it. So you can see it's clipped closed, and then I've added a strip of a very strong tacky tape to the bottom half of his face, and then for each one of the yarn pieces I want to just fold it in half and then actually press the fold end right up into that adhesive, and then I'm just going to continue on until I've gone all the way across the strip. And then just really pushing that yarn down solidly into that tape. You can see now that that's made the beard. For rounding the hat, I'm just using the platform that came out of my die cutting machine. You could also just use the edge of the counter. To add the hat to the gnome, I want to make sure the glue goes only on the face side of the ball. So just at the upper part of the face piece, and then some glue, and stick that hat to it. Now I just added a little bit of ink around the edges of the nose piece, and then I'll put that on with pop dots so that it overlaps the beard, but it also overlaps the hat a little bit. So then just unclipping it, you can see now how it's going to pop up. For his sleeves, I'm going to use ribbon. So I've found some teal ribbon. I've cut 2 pieces that are 3 inches long, and then out on the end of the ribbon, I'm going to sandwich 2 of the hand circles back to back around the end of the ribbon and just clip that until the glue dries. And while I'm waiting on that glue, I can go ahead and add some hair to the red sides of the gnome, the 2 sides that are just next to the face piece. And I'm doing that same thing with a strip of tacky tape and then the folded over yarn into that tape. Okay, and since those 2 red sides are meant to be his hair, then I'll go ahead and add a second row of yarn. So another strip of tacky tape above the first one, then just fill it in with the yarn. And then some glue to attach the sleeves. Now, one thing I noticed is my glue was kind of soaking through my ribbon as it was drying, and I was a little worried about collapsing it down and clipping it and having it glued to the hat. So I just stuck my nonstick sheet in the clip to protect it. I used the same method for the other sleeve. Okay, to make the card for my gnome, I started with a piece of cardstock 10.5 inches wide by 9 inches tall. Now I'm looking to have a 7-inch square in the center of this piece, so that means I need to score at 1 3/4 on the long sides and then 1 inch on the short sides, and that will leave me with a 7-inch square in between the score lines. And now I will use my scissors to remove all of the corners, so just following the score lines, kind of cutting on the inside of those score lines so that they are removed. Then I'll just take my bone folder and fold all of those flaps toward the inside. I cut a square of the same cardstock to just a little bit less than 7 inches. It will go on the back, but not yet, because I want it to cover the brad prongs for when I add the gnome later. So I had to use a second sheet of cardstock to be able to get that big square, but luckily all of the scraps from that are enough to be able to cut 4 of the flap dies from the flap enclosure die set. Now that flap is designed to go perfectly around a 5-inch square, but since we're making a larger card, I am not going to fold on the score line. Rather, I am just using the score line as a guide to line it up and glue it centered to each flap, where that score line is just going right along the edge of the flap. And then so each side would look less boxy, I decided to just take my scissors and cut at an angle from the corner up to the edge of the flap, and I did that for all of them. Okay, so with these larger custom flaps, I'm not going to be able to use the decorator piece that comes in the flap enclosure die set. It won't be large enough. Instead, I'm going to trace the shape of the full flap onto the back of a piece of pattern paper, and then I'm just going to cut inside the line. So if I cut enough inside the line, I won't cover up the pretty stitch marks on the edge of my flap. And at this point, I'm just cutting the 4 that will cover the outside of the flaps. And when I put the right side on, I want to make sure that I first add a strong magnet to the cardstock before I cover it up with the pattern paper. And then I would just continue on with that same trace and cut method until all 4 of the outer flaps are covered in pattern paper. Opening up those flaps, I'm going to add a big 6 3/4 inch square of pattern paper to the inside of the card. Then I'll use that same trace and cut method to decorate the 2 smaller flaps inside the card. Now I can use the die as a stencil for determining where the hole should go to put the brad through. And to do that, I would just collapse the gnome down and then place it over the top of the die, just lining up all the spokes. And then I can just slide the die around until I feel like it's centered. The hat is staying inside the score line at the top. Once I get a location I like, I can take the gnome off of there, just make any little final side-to-side adjustments, and then use a pen through the center hole to mark where the hole should be pierced. Okay, and then I just need to collapse the gnome down while I open up the prongs of the brad, get them through that hole on the card, and then open them up on the back of the card. Okay, so now you see the gnome is inside the card and he spins nicely. Those bag clips are also really helpful for keeping the card closed while you're working. So this first thing I'm going to do is just add that cardstock square to the back of the card. Okay, let me work on that closure now. So I'll just throw the magnets up on top of the right flap. They'll stick to the one that's hidden between the paper. On the left side, I pierced a hole for a decorative brad. So I'll choose a piece of ribbon or twill and cut it basically double the length so that it can fold over onto itself and hide the little prongs from the decorative brad on the right side. So the right side brad doesn't go through the flap, it just goes through one layer of ribbon. And then a long piece of double stick tape all over the inside of the ribbon where I can peel that up. Now I've got a sticky piece of ribbon that will stick to itself. Now in the process of sticking that ribbon closed, I do want to see if I can work those magnets in the correct position. So they should be just to the right side of that decorative brad in between the two layers of ribbon. Once the magnets are in, then I can seal down the ribbon. Okay, so with the magnet stuck down on the right side, then that'll help me determine where the decorative brad needs to go through the ribbon on the left side so that it can go down through that hole and to the inside of the flap. Then I just open up the prongs. And depending on how thick the papers and cardstocks and embellishments are, 3 magnets may not be enough to hold that closed. So I may have to go in and just peel up the twill so that I can add another magnet in the stack. And you can also add strength to the magnet stack by just putting one on the inside flap since it hasn't been covered yet with pattern paper. So you can see that I've added one to the inside flap as well. Okay, once the closure is done, then I can add the flap decorations on the inside of the card to finish those out. I hand cut some little thumbs for the gnome so that he can hold a couple of items from our Garden Charms set. So to add those little thumbs, I just used glue up at the top, and then I can slide the tool underneath the thumb and then glue it into position however I think looks best. Now from here, you really could go a lot of different ways with theme, but I thought it would make a good birthday card, so I decided on Happy Birthday from the Garden. The front of the card is decorated with more of our Garden Charms and our Crosshatch ovals set, and then the red flower was actually just a paper flower from my stash, so I didn't die cut that. For the inside decorations, I went with the same ovals and charms throughout. Then on the back flap, I added our big script Happy Birthday. And then when the gnome spins around, I put the second half of the greeting from the garden, which comes from the Garden Charms, on the back of the gnome. And then the oval at the base flap is left blank so that I can write a personal greeting. Now when the gnome is all crouched down, because he's holding tools, those tools are going to extend past the fold lines on the side. So I don't want them to get crumpled when I close up the card. So instead I'm going to bring them up and onto his hat before I close up the flaps. And then that way, as you open it, they're going to just kind of flop down into position. The finished card measures 7 by 7 square. I probably suggest a bubble mailer if you're going to mail it alone, or maybe it's just going to get tucked in with a present into a bigger box. Obviously, if you can give it to somebody in person, you get to watch them open it, which is also fun. If you swap the papers and add a circle to the top of his hat, he makes a great Christmas gnome. If you'll check the description box below this YouTube video, you will find a link to the blog post and a supply list. Thanks for watching. If you click on the website link, you'll go to KarenBurniston.com where you can find out information about purchasing these dies as well as links to all my other social media accounts. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel and check out some of my other videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.